I love being in conversation and in the presence of people that just love people, love God, love people, loves the sacred, and you, man, you've been living that life. So I just want to, first, this is such an honor to be with you, and you an OG, but you have that young spirit, and you've always animated so much of everything that you've touched. So it's so when that's why I like, man, I don't want to do this Zoom. I want to be with you in person, be in the firehouse. Let me say this as a brother whose entire adult life has been indebted to the larger Black American experience, struggle, movement, but has always been grounded and proud of who I am as a Palestinian. I've always been informed by those threads, right? My mother was among the first Palestinian families as a refugee on the south side of Chicago. Wow. My grandfather's house, first house right there on 65th and Loomis. She grew up and graduated Marquette Park, and then, met my father, who a Jerusalem family, went back, and I was born over there, but I jumped around the world until I came back to Chicago, been organizing on the south side, now for 3 decades. But I'm always, as a Palestinian, you never lose sight of your connection to that struggle, and to the struggle of people across the globe. There is a reason why there is absolutely no other community on the face of the earth that has been more aligned and connected to the Palestinian struggle than Black folks in America. Right. From Cherry Chisholm, Jesse Jackson, Stokely Carmichael, Malcolm, Michelle Alexander, Ta-Nehisi Coates, anyone with any sense of consciousness. Right. Because it's not that. Look, I got a PhD from one of the finest universities in the world, in one of the most competitive departments in the world, right? University of Chicago, sociology. Now, I did not come and get organized to go get a PhD, but I was organizing and said, man, I want to better understand this, and did one of the only dissertations on the Black Peace Stone Nation and hip hop and global consciousness. And I said I wanted nothing to do with criminological stuff because I cared less. I want to better understand the spiritual, cultural, global development and consciousness of these brothers on the South Side that had been failed by every institution in the world, but still had the mindfulness to connect themselves like people 75 years earlier, like people, coming out of that Garveyite tradition, to think outside of the nation state. And to think about how we're connected to the globe. So we are all indebted to the Black American struggle, because in it is the ability to think outside the doctrine of the nation state, to connect ourselves to people across the globe, to correct the people who are suffering across the globe. And unlike the pain and suffering right now in the Congo, in Tigray, in Ethiopia, we need to be connected to it all. But the situation in Israel and Palestine, everybody knows, number one, is unique in so many ways. First of all, we fork out billions of dollars every year to support Israel unconditionally. And now, even in the midst of this, they want $14 billion more. And unlike any other country in the globe, whether you're the son of a Holocaust survivor like Bernie Sanders, a Black man from the west side of Chicago, or a Palestinian brought up on the south side of Chicago, there is one country in the world that you dare to criticize, and you do so at potentially the cost of everything. That is the unspoken reality that everybody knows in this country, and we need to be honest about it. And my brothers and sisters of the Jewish tradition that come from a tradition of speaking truth to power understand this more than anyone else, because they even speak out and get confronted as being called self-hating Jews. I would talk about even Jewish folks whose families perished in the Holocaust. You're gonna tell Bernie Sanders that he doesn't have a love for the Jewish tradition and the Jewish experience? Because he dares to critique the zealot military response that's annihilating a group of people Now, let's be real clear. I was in Israel, Palestine on October 7th because I was leading with Pastor Otis Moss, the first delegation called Black Jerusalem.
That's right. That's right.
For 2 weeks, we went and sped and connected and looked at Jerusalem and its sacred tradition really through a Afrocentric Black lens that allowed us to connect to African Palestinians, to our Hebrew brothers in Dimona, to the Ethiopian communities, Christians, and to reframe that region not as the Middle East, because Middle East of what? A cartographer's office in London during the height of empire? Why isn't Palestine Northeast Africa?
That's right.
Right? Why is the Middle East? And that's not just semantics. That's not an incidental question, because that's the question of colonial legacy.
Wow.
It is only the Middle East because it was owned by the colonial empire of Britain and the Europeans. And that's where our story about understanding the Palestinian-Israeli conflict as it exists now should probably begin. First of all, let's put to bed certain myths. One, the idea that this is somehow a religious conflict between Muslims and Jews. And unfortunately, even at the highest level in Obama's office, and I know those folks in the White House, and I'll be like, why are you perpetuating this lie? I have cousins that are married to Jewish folks. We grew up, if you look at memoirs of Palestinians in the 1920s, 1930s, it's never been picture perfect. But let me tell you, before 1890, over 100 years ago, in what's now Israel, Palestine as it was called then, even on the maps of Europeans, the Jewish population was around, there was around 5 to 10,000 at most, up against 500,000, 700,000 Muslims and Christians. We're talking about the sacred ancient land. My grandfather, by the way, who on my mother's side came from the village of Ein Kera, which is the village of John the Baptist. Wow. You go to Bethlehem, we understand these are the ancient sacred places. Zionism as a movement emerges, remember, out of European real trauma and pain. And we, look, as human beings, we can identify and understand and sit with and appreciate the pain of the pogroms, pains even way before the Holocaust, right? That the Jewish community across Europe was suffering. But now the European Jewish leaders at the time, who were making kind of the clarity of the movement of Zionism to find a Jewish homeland, they were doing so. Nobody should dispute the fact that it was a colonial project. Of course, it was a colonial project. That was the air in which everyone was breathing. It was European empire. Right. These were brothers coming out of Europe, and these were Jewish Europeans like Theodor Herzl and Jabotinsky that were talking to their fellow Europeans, saying, "Look, I know you all don't want Jews here, but we don't want to be here either. We want to find a place. So let's find a place." How about Uganda? Well, let's consider Uganda because it's under European Jewish control. It was under European British control. Now, you know who objected to the Uganda? Not the early Zionist thinkers. They're about to consider Uganda as a real option. Go look this up. This is not made up. This is historical fact. It was to think about the colonial arrogance. It was the other white colonialists that were in Uganda saying, "Yo, hold up. We got this. We already laid the claim to this joint."
Wow.
That's now, right. So, right now, was there and has there always been a sacred ancient connection to the land of Jewish tradition? Undoubtedly, no one is doubting that. But no one gets to make categorical claims to that tradition. Moses is mentioned 126 times in the Quran. You're going to say Moses is more sacred to us than you? No, Musa. We name our kids Musa. You know how many times the Prophet Muhammad is mentioned in the Quran? Handful.
Really?
Less than one hand. In other words, the stories of Musa and Bani Israel, the children of Israel, they're just as much part of the Muslim tradition as Christian and Jewish tradition.
Yeah. Wow.
We got stories about Moses galore. So that ancient sacred human tradition, it's a sacred human tradition.
True.
That animates the story of the rabbi, troublemaker that comes, then years after Moses.
Right.
Isa, Jesus, but we also name our children after.
Yeah.
And listen, you were right in their memoirs in the 1920s and 1930s, written by Palestinians. There's one named Wasif Johar, probably the most famous memoirist of that time. Playing oud. The brother used to be partying at night, playing oud. But in the day they were praying, they were fasting. He's an Orthodox Christian that memorized the Quran. And he's like, and yesterday we went to the Purim festival for our Jewish brothers and sisters. Today we're going to Eid. Tomorrow's Easter. That was the vibe.
Yeah. I love that.
And that is often the vibe. That doesn't mean there weren't little moments of conflict, but that was the vibe. But what began to distinguish it? European colonialists, the early Zionist movement, had to appeal to the thought process of these European landlords who were animated by the idea that they were God's caretakers on earth to help civilize the barbarians and savages across the non-Western European world. That was animated. That was colonialism. If you don't know colonialism, they controlled 85% of the world. These colonial powers animated Rudyard Kipling, white man burden, and it's the same language that animated the way the United States started taking over places like Cuba, Philippi. Not just the same language, same poems. If you go to 1898 in U.S. Congress, Rudyard Kipling's White Man's Burden is being recited in the halls of Congress as part of the justification for why the United States needs to take Guam, Philippines, Cuba. Woo. So let's not get it twisted.
It's so embedded.
And I don't understand this. It didn't come out of nowhere. I mean, Hitler didn't start thinking about a master race out of nowhere. Hitler in Mein Kampf is citing Madison Grant, an American writer who wrote Passing of the Great Race in 1915. These were not peripheral texts. They were being cited by the Rockefellers and the Carnegies, and they were part of even early American philanthropy.
Yeah.
So nobody's hands are clean up in this joint. And so we got to understand this. And so when the early Zionists, when they were coming to Palestine, they were very different from the early Jews that had still stayed around. These were European Jews that were coming using the theme of colonialism. They were saying to the British colonial masters, listen, man, give us this joint. Because you know what we're going to be? We're going to be an island of civility. Like, yes, we're Jewish, but we're still very European. You're going to be able to see us. We'll be an island in civility in a sea of barbarity.
Ooh.
Man. Right? So come on. We can make a deal here, right? We can make a deal.
Hey.
These Arabs will eventually, they got a whole bunch of places we can put them. Wow. Let us, slowly come in. So you start seeing a migration that starts to flow post World War I. Those numbers begin to increase. Now you begin to be seeing on 20s and 30s a larger number until the War of 1948, which again then half of the Palestinians, they lose all of their land. And of course they didn't like the UN deal because it meant like you got to give up half of what you had. My grandfather, 700,000 like them. But that was the same year Israel was born, and it's the same year that 700,000 Palestinians become refugees, many of them brutally killed, murdered, displaced, lose 500 villages. People like my mother's grandfather, my mother's father, who's still alive, 96, 97, could tell you. Now, he's the one I wrote about in the USA Today article. Yeah. He'll tell you, my grandfather didn't have anything against Jewish people. In 1946, in the same village, there were Polish refugees that were Jewish. They were taken care of. Yeah. They were feeding, and they were chilling with. My grandfather, we liked them. They were good for us. So this idea that somehow Palestinians dislike, hate, want to kill Jews is so baked into this idea that we're savages, right? It's that old colonial motif. Yeah. Now, what happened, because I want to fast forward because people are trying to understand, well, what's happening now? Listen, was October 7th barbaric and horrendous? Absolutely. Absolutely. Even if one woman was assaulted, that is in our faith traditions, that's a thing that we will condemn no matter what. Yeah. And it's not, and you can establish that. But what most Americans have absolutely no, and you might, especially, and I have this conversation with my Jewish brothers and sisters all the time, you have no idea about the reality of life of occupation, the day-to-day humility, the day-to-day oppression. Young kids that are being hauled out of their houses at 13 or 14, putting in administrative detentions, having their bones broken, like literally by the Israeli occupation forces across the West Bank, Jerusalem, every single day. That reality of military occupation, because remember, there were several major wars, but in 1967, essentially the 6-Day War, as it's called, Israel occupies and takes it all, right? And then the West Bank and Gaza become occupied territories. And life under those, that means, and most of us, and again, we were just talking about the play here on the west side of Chicago. There have been moments in Black American life more than anything, and other minorities have had to confront this, but nothing like the Black American experience where you have seen troops in the street, right? But it is nothing like the day-to-day reality of growing up with tanks and Uzi submachine guns every single day. I was a 10-year-old coming to visit my family. I'm taken aside. I got an American passport thinking I'm all good. I'm at the border, taken with my brother at 7, put aside in a room, stripped down to our underwear, right? That day-to-day stuff and Uzi submachine guns in your face, the day-to-day kind of peace, going through just to visit your family. You have to go through like 50 different, multiple checkpoints. What could be a 30-minute drive ends up being like a, 3-4 hour drive. In other words, the life of occupation and the type of resentment.
But why?
Why are we occupied?
The 6-Day War created this level of needed to control. I mean, the context of it being
because Israel takes over the rest of the entire West Bank. And remember, by this point, now you start having a thread of a extreme religious Zionism that is animated by the same type of manifest destiny type of, you think about the early settlers in America. Some were just, this is business, bro, right? Others were animated by, remember, there was the dual configuration of science and religion that created the evil of white supremacy in America. They genuinely believed that this was God's work.
That's still here, right? That's right. Still here.
Genuinely believe that's still here, animating, right? Saving. Look, the colonial motif and theme, and it's present in Hollywood, it's present in movies. You can see it in depiction. Non-Western European people, including Black folks, typically get depicted in 2 ways. Either we're going to have to, you're either the victim or you're a villain, right? Either you're a victim to poor young Black kid brought up in the midst of a blah blah, or you one of them, right? And so that gives you 2 options. If you're the non-white, if you're the white folks, whoever the European force is, I either got to liberate you or liquidate you.
Exactly.
It's either liberation, liquidation, right? Victim, villain. So, right? So you start coming through the West Bank and Gaza now. Remember, the religious Zionism starts then infusing another narrative to say this was ours. This was promised to us. All of it. I don't care that you've been here for 700 years, 800 years, Palestinian family living in blah, blah, blah. I don't care if I just came from Brooklyn, Queens. I own this. Get out. Get out.
Just from the religious Zionism.
Yeah, I got that. And sometimes the argument is that simple.
That's simple.
Hey, this is us. It's own to God gave it to us. You want to dispute that?
Wow.
So it is that type now. That needs to be called out. And you're beginning to see, like, these settlers, they're being, in this administration, this Israeli regime, on October 6th, even vast majorities of Israel saw as the worst form of its extreme representation of right-wing militant ideas since the formation of Israel in 1948. You have ministers of defense that are handing out Uzi submachine guns. You want to talk about all of it is like it's stand and carry on steroids.
Wow. Wow.
That, of course, no Palestinian, you kidding? Like, you know how many, even before when I got there with the delegation, my cousin said my colleague's son was just shot and killed at this train station. They haven't recovered his body. And all they had to do was say, we thought he had a knife.
What? A knife?
A knife.
Potentially.
We saw what looked like. The body will lay there, and anyone could up their Uzi submachine gun. Because, and you'll see if you go there, it's very common for Israeli civilians to walk around with Uzi submachine guns. I've had these, oh yes. And the minister is handing them out to settlers. Come. Oh, yeah, here, AKs, right?
And you went.
Yeah. The thing that tripped me out whenever I go is it's not just the easy view of the militarism, but it's the youthful age of the young people walking around.
Oh yeah, because remember, all of them got to serve in the military at 18, 19. And you're talking about Israelis that then again they infuse it in them. And I've had to confront this. I mean, I remember I was studying there once at 3:00 in the morning. They were raiding the entire village. I'm hearing sirens out. They're pulling olive out, and I'm like, oh man. I know it's, finally they get to my door and I knocked out because they're dragging out everyone else. And they get to my door. This is in a village called Birzeit outside of Ramallah. And it's like 7, 8 soldiers and they're kids.
Yes.
And they got the machines, right? They got the AKs right up in my face. And they're like, get everyone out. And they're talking to me in Arabic. And I'm like, there's nobody in here. Like, get everyone out. I'm like, I promise you, there's nobody in here. You walk in and they walk in and we sit down. We had this conversation with their commander, my thing. And I'm an American there. I'm there on a U.S. State Department grant and all this type of stuff. Trying to I'm just here studying language, bro. And I'm reading all of this. But listen, one of the things that need to be clearly articulated when you go there, and you cannot go there and not see it unless you are, and this is what I think is a tragedy. I want to call this out, but before I say this, let me say a little bit more about October 7th, because that's what's on people's mind. Again, every criminal, even with those years of oppression, and this was the deadliest year even before October 7th on record for Palestinians in many years. We're talking about settlers that were burning down olive trees. Palestinians rely on their harvest. We're to olive, annual harvest every year. We're talking about olive trees that go to the time of Jesus. Mm-hmm. They're being uprooted. Families' homes are being destroyed. They're terrorizing the Palestinian villages, right? All of this is happening day in, day out. Settlers are incurring closer and closer in Jerusalem. Even while we were there, we saw it right into this narrow Palestinian streets. Soldiers, with every settler, there's like with one settler, 20 soldiers come. So they know what they're doing. Mm-hmm. They know what they're doing because a settler comes and provokes. And the minute there's a Palestinian response, there's bodies on the ground and it's not going to be theirs, right? Mm-hmm. And so, and again, that's happening. That's pulsating. So this is the day in, day out life. Now, out of all the West Bank, Gaza has always been the hood of the hood of the hood of the hood. Why? Because all of these are refugees upon refugees. They're living in Chicago. The comparison is Gaza Strip is 25 miles. I always say, look, it's Lakeshore Drive from like Rogers Park all the way to South Shore, right? That length. And it's from the lake to probably like Cicero. That's the Gaza Strip.
Wow.
Okay?
Wow.
2 million people there. Most densely concentrated place on the face of the earth. Been under complete siege, has had 5 invasions upon invasions, right? You talk about children that have been, the trauma is unimaginable even by October 6th. October 7th happens. The details of everything we're still beginning to find out. Who did what? I mean, we know trauma and terror happened that day, undoubtedly, and we condemn it. Afterwards, though, what has happened? We're now talking about a death toll of 30,000. We're probably talking about an injury list of 80,000. We're talking about the Gaza Strip that has completely been decimated. Infrastructure, families, lives, hospitals, universities, churches. I was in the White House disputing this, and I was close to Biden like this. I was challenging this man. You were relying on right-wing Israeli intelligence to begin to defend and justify the annihilation of innocent people and infrastructure, my Mr. President. Well, there's tunnels everywhere. But number one, you're not that's not a substantive forensic claim for being able to then to decimate a hospital with babies in ICU and NICU units. The day I was talking to the president, the day before, the fourth oldest church on earth was bombed with people in Gaza, with people huddling and dying in there. I was like, I asked him about that church specifically. Where's the Hamas tunnels under that? And just to begin to fully understand how much we have dehumanized the Palestinian people here in Chicago, if they were to discover, if God forbid, in some group of Norwegian mafia emerge in Chicago and carry out a deadly assault on innocents, and then claimed, and then, in fact, maybe even had a network of underground kind of subterranean tunnels across this city, some of which may have been even under Northwestern or Rush. Do you think we would entertain going after them by bombing the hospitals?
Right, exactly. Right.
With people in there? Right. We have blown up dozens of hospitals, schools, and I say we, because there's no doubt about it. This is a joint Israeli-American operation. It's our money, it's our bombs, it's our dollars, it's our green light that we gave Netanyahu on October 8th. When he said it was 16 9/11s, that was his signal. And when President Biden repeated that line for the world in Israel, that was an invitation. 16 9/11s, okay. We saw what you all did in Afghanistan and Iraq. Get out of the way. You better not say anything. And that's when Netanyahu's now, Biden and Blinken are saying, look, you're going a little too far. What he uses it, you're going over the top. And what gangster Netanyahu, you got to give him credit. He's a gangster. He said, look, we told you on October 8th, bro. This was 16 9/11. And that was our language to say, you better not say anything to us. And we better still get that $16 billion.
Right.
Who talks like that?
Gangsters.
Pimps and gangsters that have something on you.
Right.
You got something on you. That's what I was about to say.
Got something on you.
Got something on you.
Something on you. And let's talk about that. My brothers and sisters in the Jewish community here in Chicago, I love them and I work with them and I've been aligned with them. I've been mentored by them. People like Rabbi Marx, God bless his soul, was a person that I take very seriously. I always say he's the greatest civil rights rabbi you never heard of. He marched with King. Here in Chicago, we talk about Rabbi Heschel all the time. We should talk about people like Rabbi Marx. He marched with King in Marquette Park. He confronted he for me modeled the spiritual lesson that all religious communities should think about, where it says "Kunu qawmina bil qist" in the Quran, "Walau ala anfusikum," which translates "Be people of justice, even if it means standing against yourself."
That's what I'm saying. Yeah.
So what did Rabbi Marx was doing even after, like when we used to celebrate Rabbi Marx for March with King, he's like, no, really that wasn't the thing he was most proud of. The things that Rabbi Marx was most proud of is the work that he did, like on confronting contract sales.
Right.
That was, right?
Yeah.
And the idea that and challenging brothers and sisters in his own community that were complicit in that.
Yeah.
Not just blockbusting, but depriving, as we know, billions of dollars out of wealth in the Black community.
Right.
So
just like here with the book Family Car. The whole movement of that.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah.
So point being, the Jewish American tradition is one that I have had. I'm very explicit with when I speak in synagogues and others, and when I speak with my brothers and sisters from the Jewish community. As a kid, unfortunately, the only thing I knew of the Jewish experience was Israeli military occupation. I conflated the two. So you asked me as a 12-year-old what I thought about Jews. I would have been, you say I hate Jews. No, I was afraid of them.
Right.
Truth be told. But it wasn't until I started organizing in Chicago and started meeting the likes of Jane Ramsey and the tradition of Jewish Council of Urban Affairs and Jewish folks embedded in the tradition, and start having a better understanding of the tradition, meeting Jewish scholars that were seeped in understanding and real committed to critical race, not just theory, but liberation, right, for all of our communities. So that I'm grateful that exists in Chicago. But it also exists alongside another thread that we got to be honest about. And that is some of our brothers and sisters feel that you must support Israel, right or wrong, no matter what. No matter what. And to criticize Israel is a existential threat for Jewish communities everywhere. And they have, unfortunately, leveraged resources behind those type of arguments to take people like my dear Stephanie Coleman, all the movement.
Yep.
There's not a Jewish family in the 16th Ward that I know of, other than one African-American Jewish family that I'm proud to know and stand with, but very few.
Yep.
Why is she being brought to Israel by the Jewish Federation? Let's be honest. Let's be clear. Let's not mince words. These trips that have been underwritten, who doesn't want to go to the Holy Land? Who does not want to go see that? But oftentimes these are trips that are often very intentionally curated to give its visitors a hyper-specific focus on Israel's narrative through the lens of a government that does not want to come to terms with its original sin. It's like coming to the United States and not confronting. It's like what the great white evangelical, writer talks about Jim Wallace, America's original sin.